Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to Drums and Drams. My name's Cameron, and today I've got a very special whiskey in my glass. This is a pour of the newly released Murray Hill Club Special Release Batch Number 4 from Joseph Magnus, which of course means that this was blended, and also in this case finished, by none other than Nancy Fraley, the master blender for Magnus. Now, at the beginning of this video, I do want to take a second to publicly acknowledge and thank Nancy for a couple of things. The first of which is just her involvement in the WhiskeyTube community and really the whiskey community at large. She's active on Instagram, I think on Reddit, and maybe some other forums. She's in live chats and comment sections here on YouTube. And she's also just very transparent about things. She's kind of an open book and shares a lot of the behind the scenes of what goes on with different blending projects. And it's just kind of a cool thing for me as a consumer first, enthusiast first, and also a YouTube reviewer second. It's just great to kind of have Nancy as a resource out there and somebody that's, so supportive of what we're doing here on YouTube and what other folks are doing in the community as well. But on a more personal note, I do want to thank Nancy for this batch of cigar blend, specifically batch 193, which is named a drummer's dram. So Nancy did a run of these cigar blend batches where she named them after different YouTube channels and Instagram handles and other things like that. And Drums and Drams made the cut, so we have a drummer's dram batch 193. This is kind of old news a little bit, but I don't think I've publicly thanked Nancy in a video like this, so I do want to just kind of shout her out here very quickly. And for those of you who are watching this so far and you're like, all right, dude, you're clearly going to be biased in this review. Well, I'm going to say what I say at the beginning of a lot of my videos and what I tell folks. Take this review and any review you watch with a grain of salt, not only for, maybe friendships and connections and things like that, where I'm always still going to do my best to give the most unbiased review I possibly can, but also we have different palates, and so you're going to get different reads on whiskeys from different folks. So let's get into this review now. I'm going to tell you what is actually in this blend, this finishing project as well, like how all of this came together. And I'm also I'm also going to apologize quickly to two folks, Anthony Q and Mike G. They both sent me samples and I screwed up. I was on vacation and I said yes to both people and I forgot that I was already receiving a sample. So I have a little extra here. Sorry guys that you wasted your whiskey on me, but it's given me a chance to really dig into this a little bit behind the scenes. So what is actually in the glass here? Well, this is a blend of 8 and 17, not 8 to 17, but 8 and 17-year-old MGP bourbon. The mash bill, 75% corn, 21% rye, 4% malted barley. And so we have, some blend of those 8 and 17-year components. I don't know the exact proportions. That blend was then put into what sound like they were freshly dumped or fairly fresh casks that previously held Calvados, which if anybody has had any Calvados finished things or had Calvados themselves, you understand the impact, the kind of apple forward and rich fruit impact that Calvados can have on whiskeys. This blend was finished for 4 months in those casks. After it was dumped, I think it was left to rest sometime, between 4 to 5 weeks or so. And what that's going to do is allow that finishing and that blend to fully marry together. And so it's kind of cool, again, that we know all of this information from Nancy and from Magnus. This is bottled at 111 proof, so a pretty nice proof point here. And so I think that's it. I think we're going to get into this now on the nose. As you can expect, from something like this, we have some highly aged whiskey in the blend. We have a finish going on. The color is dark, and that's all I'm going to say. Let's get into the nose now. Here we go with this Murray Hill Club special release. Wow. All right. So right off the bat, this is a very dark profile for a whiskey. I've got to say, big chocolate notes are jumping out of the glass for me, molasses notes as well, but it's got a lot of fruit notes, and you would expect that from being finished in Calvados casks. There is that kind of standard, Calvados influence, apple pie notes, cinnamon apple, heavy on those apple notes, but I also get chocolate covered cherries in here. I get kind of maybe dried apricot or maybe a dried blood orange kind of citrus component to this as well. It's dense, it's decadent. It's interestingly floral as well. Yeah, this has kind of a Thanksgiving thing. I feel like I walked into my grandma's house at Thanksgiving. You got the potpourri, you got the cranberry sauce, all of those kind of aromas in the air. Of course, pie is going to come out probably at the end too, right? But it has that kind of that floral element that's not necessarily, It's not like super bright and in your face, but it is enough to kind of punctuate through or puncture through the heavy kind of fruity and chocolatey finishing layer that the whiskey has on the nose. So it does peek through just a little bit with this floral component. But I think like when I'm saying Thanksgiving, I'm really getting into like that potpourri kind of experience for me. And the other thing I want to say about this is that it's very tart on the nose. Like if you imagine eating maybe some sort of like a cherry pie, there's sweetness there, but there's a tart kind of crispness to it as well. And again, I'm going to go cranberry sauce on this. I'm definitely getting that tart element on the nose. So it smells good. I like this profile a lot. It feels a teeny bit heavy on the finish for me, and I am kind of a stickler for finished whiskeys. Only a few finished whiskeys have I ever liked that are completely blown out of the water by the finish. I'm not saying by any means that this is blown out of the water by the Calvados finish, but I would believe that these were pretty fresh casks that it went into, and that it does feel like it had quite a bit of impact in those 4 months. So with that said, we probably will come back to the nose here, but I want to get this thing on the palate now. So cheers, guys. Oh, wow. Broad whiskey on the palate. Ooh, and very kind of syrupy, sticky, tangy in the mid palate as we get into the finish now. And as the finish develops, trying to talk through this, as the finish develops, the spice actually ramps up. So let's kind of rewind now. Front of the palate on this whiskey does feel like there is quite a heavy finish to it. When it hits the front of my tongue, I'm not immediately met with spice that's going to kind of drive the whiskey forward. I'm met with a very broad kind of experience with a lot of those dark fruit notes on the front of the palate. As it starts to develop and roll back, those fruit notes and kind of that chocolate, it moves from sweet to tangy and a little bit sour in the mid palate. And that's definitely that Calvados, influence that you're getting there. Once you start getting into the finish, that's where this cinnamon spice ramps up. So the spice kind of arrives in the later part of the sip. And stylistically for me, it's just kind of a different style than what I'm used to, in large part because it is a finished whiskey. And I do think the finish, I'm gonna be a little critical. I think it's 10 to 15% too finished for me, at least. For somebody that personally prefers to have a little bit more spirit and base spirit influence to the whiskey, where the finish is just the cherry on top, kind of literally in this case, right? Cherry and apple pie. But I'm that kind of a drinker, and so for me, this is a little bit of a departure from my standard kind of, general expectation of how I like a whiskey to develop on the palate. Now, that doesn't mean it's bad or it's wrong. In fact, like if you go into this thinking, all right, this is a finished whiskey, maybe I'm going to expect something totally different, then you're probably not going to, you're going to like this a lot. It's not going to defy your expectations if you come into it with no expectations. And maybe that's my fault, right? I go into this and I love a whiskey that has a little pop of spice up front and it develops nice and evenly, but ramps up pretty big. This one's different. It hits you soft up front, sweet, moves to tangy, then the spice comes into the finish. But look, this is me being hypercritical. This is delicious, and I mean delicious whiskey. I got to do another sip now. Here we go. Cheers. My God. It's just like all fresh fruit on the second sip. Wow. And honestly, by the second sip, once my palate really is accustomed to how oily and kind of fatty almost and rich this whiskey is on the palate, I'm a lot less concerned about the whole rant I just gave, the whole kind of spiel about development and stuff. Like the first sip for me, I can really pick that apart, the idea of how it develops and less about the tasting notes. But now as we get into additional sips and we sit with the whiskey for a while, like now I can start to dive into those tasting notes, and the experience is just kind of holistically very nice, and it just tastes freaking delicious. It is so dark, so sweet, but it has the tangy sour element to counterbalance it. and enough spice, again, particularly in the finish. So you get a complex whiskey. You get a whiskey that feels very well put together in this case. And I also do like the fact that I can taste kind of on the back end like an aged MGP oak note. It's not like this, again, it's not like this is blown out of the water by the finish. To me, it's just maybe just a little, you pull it 2 weeks earlier, whatever the case may be. I have no idea. But on the back end, I do kind of get that earthy damp oak note that I get on older MGP whiskeys. And there is 17-year stuff in this blend. I don't know how much, but I feel like that's kind of the impact that that's having on the finish there. So here we go, one more sip of this stuff. Jeez, I mean, the more you sip this whiskey, I think the better it gets, which is crazy because in a lot of cases, the more that you go back to a whiskey, it gets a little flatter. It's predictable. This thing has so many layers for you to find in it. It's just incredible stuff. So that's going to do it for this review. Oh, little vanilla bean actually just popping up. So that's going to do it for this review, guys. Let me know if you've had the chance to try this. Again, for my taste, I could do 10 to 15% less finish, but as it is, I think it's a $200 bottle. This is a buy. This is absolutely a buy. If you hate finished whiskey of any kind, maybe you steer clear of this one. All right, and particularly at the price point, it is a premium whiskey. I get it. But if you're looking for something that's going to be in maybe your top whiskey of the year list, this is absolutely going to be there. Whether you separate in your mind, single barrels and finished versus small batch, I don't know how you're going to do it personally. But for me, I would say this is probably one of the best whiskeys I've tasted this year. Top 5, top 10 kind of whiskey. It's delicious stuff, even with the fact that I'm just being a little nitpicky and complaining about it here and there. Phenomenal job, Nancy. I love Calvados finishing. I hate Calvados on its own. I cannot drink the stuff. But when it's used in a finish like this, I think it is phenomenal. So that's going to do it, guys. Like, comment, subscribe. Check out the Patreon for some barrel pick drops, additional content. And let me know if you've tried this in the comment section below. Cheers, and I'll see you next time here on Drums and Drams.